Subscribe for more true feel drama and twists. Leave a comment. Evelyn's glow up. Now the story. I remember the exact moment she said it. We were in my tiny living room, evening light slicing through dusty blinds, and she stood by my broken bookshelf like a judge with a gavel. "You'll never amount to anything," she said, the words soft but sharp, as if she'd practiced them. Her voice had that cold edge that made bone ache. I felt my chest tighten. My name is Evelyn. I was 27 then, with a half-finished screenplay in a folder and a head full of stubborn hope. She tossed a magazine on the couch, a glossy spread of actors in gowns, and smirked like she just explained gravity. "You need stability," she said. Not nonsense. She counted my failures like coins. She listed jobs I'd lost, auditions I'd flubbed, rent I'd missed. Each sentence landed like a stone. I tried to argue back, voice trembling, but she cut me off with a look. The unfairness hit me first. Not the criticism, but the way someone you loved could turn it into a verdict. I felt small, ridiculous, exposed. In that instant I vowed something terrible and beautiful. I would prove her wrong in a way that left no room for doubt. The vow was a quiet flame, but it burned something awake inside me. After she left that night, the apartment felt like an echo chamber. I sat on the floor among unpaid bills and the battered laptop that had seen better plot lines. I opened my screenplay again. The same pages I'd rewritten 3 times stared back. My hand shook, but I typed. I fed the small flame with scene after scene, making characters who wouldn't quit. The next morning I taped sticky notes to the mirror. "You are not what she says." I started waking earlier, rehearsing monologues in the subway, reading lines to strangers' uninterested faces. People smiled, sometimes, but mostly life moved around me. Delivery trucks, lovers arguing, kids on scooters, while I practiced survival. I took an unpaid assistant job at a small indie production company, carrying coffee and carrying dreams. Work was humiliating at first. I learned how to fold cables, how to fetch forgotten props, how to nod and learn quickly. My boss, a kind woman with sharp eyes, noticed the scripts in my bag. She asked about them, curiosity, not pity, and for the first time someone outside of me and her treated my pages like something that mattered. Each small nod from strangers and coworkers became fuel. The flame inside me grew steadier, stubborn like a weed through cracks. I began saving every rejection email like research, a map of what to fix. Months slid forward in a blur of cheap coffee and late nights. The assistant job became a stepping stone. I met a director, Marco, with a laugh that felt honest. He read a scene from my screenplay in a half-lit office and asked questions I'd never heard. "Why here? Why now?" He probed the heart of it. That afternoon he handed me a business card that felt heavier than it looked. "Come by the studio," he said. "We're casting for a short, and I want to hear you read." My stomach did that flip you only get when something might actually change your life. I practiced relentlessly, mapping my lines onto my pulse until words felt like muscle memory. The day of the audition, I wore my favorite sweater that made me feel taller. I read like my life depended on it, voice cracking and steadying in turn. Marco nodded, scribbled, and then later, after edits and small rehearsals, he told me they'd cast me in a role that wasn't mine on paper but became mine in the way I held silence. The short film was raw, shot in a single week, and everything about it smelled of honest struggle. When it played at a local festival, a producer in the crowd leaned forward, eyes bright. After it ended, she came up to me, trembling. "There's something real here," she said. I felt dizzy, like gravity had changed its mind for a second. Little wins stacked quietly, each one a brick in a slow, steady wall I was building. Success didn't roar. It crept. The festival buzz led to an email, a small role on a TV episode. I remember opening that message at dawn, hands numb from cold and hope. I took the role, small but clean, and worked until my fingers ached. I learned to trust directors, to take notes without turning them into self-doubt. My face was in frame for a few minutes, my name in the credits, and suddenly a casting director who'd seen my short invited me to read for something bigger. I moved through sets like a ghost who'd found solid ground. Each set taught me a language, how to stand when the light hits, how to hold silence so it crackles, how to bend emotion without breaking. The gossip about success came slowly. A friend sent me a screenshot of a blog that mentioned my name. People I hadn't spoken to in years messaged, "I knew you'd make it." That stung more than soothed because their sudden belief felt cheap. Meanwhile, I kept mailing my mother little notes and buying her small treats. She'd always been my quiet champion. My former partner's words lingered in the corners. "You'll never amount to anything." They were an ugly echo I was learning to drown with steady work and small triumphs. The stakes felt higher now. I didn't want revenge that was destroyed. I wanted proof that my life could shine on its own terms. Then came the email that would change trajectory, an offer to audition for a film with upward buzz, a film festival circuit darling in the making. The role was complicated. A quiet, fierce woman who holds one secret until the end. I read it until my eyes blurred. I slept badly, waking with lines on my lips. The audition room was full of colder nerves and softer hope. When they called my name, I walked in like someone moving toward a test that could break them open. I gave the role everything. A voice that kept its edges, a face that hid unsaid history. They sent a call back, then a second. When the director finally offered me the part, he said my name with a kind of reverence I hadn't expected. I cried alone in my kitchen, not from sudden joy but from release, years of tiny losses undoing their knots. The film shoot lasted months. It was grueling, beautiful, and honest in ways that felt dangerous. The director pushed me, asked for truth I didn't know I owned. We became a small, stubborn family of artists with burnt coffee and paper plates. During breaks I'd think of that night on my couch, the harsh verdict. It lit something like fuel. This was my slow, careful answering, no theatrics, just work. The festival run began, then praise, then offers. The industry's eyes started curving toward me like tides. Critics noticed. Small write-ups first, then features, then interviews where I tried to be clever and failed, and then learned how to be simply honest. Each review was a pebble in my shoe. Some irritated, some polished my name. More offers rolled in, but the one that mattered came unexpectedly, an invitation to audition for a supporting role in a film that was quietly assembling a cast thought to be Oscar-worthy. My pulse was hammered. This was the room where names became legend. I read early drafts, learned lines, and kept my feet on the ground. I rehearsed with a coach, stripped scenes down to the bone. The audition was fierce. The room felt like ice and hot light at once. Weeks passed in a blur. I tried not to imagine walking red carpets. That felt like a distracting fantasy. When they called to offer me the role, I was in a laundromat watching quarters drop. The director's voice was warm. "We'd like you." My hands were wet and suddenly clumsy with joy. The film shot across winter and into spring. We worked small miracles over late nights and tough edits. I watched the story grow, watched my part grow with it into something both fragile and undeniable. Around that time, news about the film's festival interest leaked, and whispers about awards started to stir like distant thunder. The festival circuit became a whirl. We premiered at a respected festival where critics whispered and cameras flashed. My role, small but central, was the seam that kept the film together. People reached for my name in conversations like a talisman. She carries the scene. I learned to navigate the press, to say the honest thing without over-explaining. The film collected reviews, awards, and momentum. Then the whispers turned into emails from agents who used words like trajectory. I signed with a new agent who believed in me the way some people believe in impossible weather. My life rearranged around screenings, interviews, and late-night script readings. The news that shocked me was quiet at first. My name was on a short list for supporting actress in certain industry circles. It felt unreal, like a rumor I wasn't allowed to speak aloud. I called my mother, and she laughed until she cried. She said, "I knew you could." Even as joy thrummed, I felt the other side of success, the old voice, her voice, lurking in memory, the one that once declared my limits. I didn't want to glorify it. I wanted to be steady. The possibility of an Oscar seemed like a mountain that might crumble or crown me. My vow from that night on the couch returned, steadier now. This felt like the point of no return, many small victories converging towards something that could change perception forever. As awards season heated up, pressure followed like a shadow. Interviews multiplied. Stylists entered my life with mood boards and lists of do's and don'ts. I had to learn how to shape my image without losing myself. There were nasty headlines sometimes, people who assumed parts of my past like facts and spun stories of overnight success. I tried to stay present, on set, in rehearsals, in little rituals that kept me human, a walk before dawn, a text to my mother after every screening. My former partner's face flickered in memory. How casual cruelty can be a map to how you used to see yourself. I learned to ignore the urge to prove them wrong with pettiness. Instead, I framed success as a quiet, firm answer. Quiet until the nomination lists came out. When my name appeared on one of them for supporting actress, I felt oddly detached and utterly alive. The room tilted, my breath shallow. Then came an invitation, one that made my heart thunder. The Academy wanted us to screen at an event in LA, and there was talk that the film had a real shot. I tried not to imagine the red carpet. The red carpet seemed a fantasy furnished by a life I'd only glimpsed in magazines. Still, the thought of walking into a hall filled with people who had once scrolled past my auditions felt like stepping into an old wound for healing. Days before the Oscars, the universe condensed into dress fittings, interviews, and grooming. My stylist, a woman with blunt honesty, said, "You need armor that feels like you." We chose a dress that was elegant but not armor-like, soft lines, a color that looked like dusk. My agent warned about cameras and about how people would watch my every move, reading it for meaning. I felt an odd mix of nerves and a calm I'd learned from late-night rehearsals. The night before the big event, a tabloid published a cheap rumor about me, an old mistake inflated into a headline. My phone buzzed with strangers' takes. For a moment the old voice hissed, "See? You can't escape." I breathed through it, replied to a few supportive messages, and met friends for a quiet dinner. I thought of the tiny apartment where I once had a couch and a magazine tossed in disdain. The memory felt like a coin, heavy and real. I slept poorly, heart-picking rhythms like a drumline. In my dream I was back on that couch, and then I wasn't. I was walking in a long corridor, lights reflecting off a red floor. Morning came, and with it a steady dread and an odd fizz of excitement. This was the moment that would bend years into a single flash. The red carpet arrived like a dream staged for someone else. Cameras screamed light. Reporters asked the practice questions. I hugged colleagues and smiled in ways rehearsed and true. As I walked, a strange calm settled, a sense that everything had been rehearsal for the single breath. Then, halfway down the carpet, a familiar face, her face, appeared in a cluster of photographers. She was taller than I remembered, hair coiffed, wearing a dress that said prosperity. For a second I froze, the carpet beneath me thinning like paper. She looked at me, the same small smile she used to use when she wanted to hurt. Cameras angled. Reporters whispered. My body wanted to react, anger, triumph, something loud. Instead I gave the camera a smile that was precise and quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't look away. She caught my gaze, and I saw surprise. Sharp, private. Maybe she expected me to flinch. Maybe she wanted to see me, humiliated or clawing. But I stood steady, like light that didn't need to shout. For a second, cameras captured two histories in one frame. The person who had said I'd never be anything and the person who had walked this red carpet. The moment felt cinematic, a hinge between past and present. Reporters asked me about the film. I answered honestly. Inside me, something unspooled, years of hurt knitted into a calm I wore as a quiet victory. After the carpet, at the ceremony itself, lights were softer but stakes felt sharper. The film played like a prayer. When the supporting actress category was announced, my heart pounded like a fist. The winner's name was called and, shock, my name leapt from the speaker like a tether cut loose. The sound of applause was a tidal wave. I walked to the stage with fingers that wanted to tremble, but didn't. My speech was short. Thank yous to the team, to my mother, to the director who trusted me. I mentioned the little jobs and the nights I typed into the dark and how art had saved me. Wearing that acknowledgement felt like claiming something I'd never been granted before, space. When I sat back down, I saw her at the edge of the crowd. Her face had shifted, maybe regret, maybe pride I couldn't name. I felt no triumph that tasted cruel. Instead there was an odd softness, a sense that the night had shifted not to humiliate her but to show the improbable geometry of life, how small acts compound into things that surprise. Still, the world outside the theater buzzed. Social media lit up. Headlines splashed my name and photos of my red carpet come. A friend messaged. She must be stunned. I felt my victory as an answering bell, not a weapon. But there was more ahead. Reality would need to rearrange to let this new version of my life in. The days that followed were a dizzying loop of interviews, talk shows, and congratulatory texts. Offers arrived, roles, endorsements, a book deal even. People analyzed my speech and my dress like it was scripture. I tried to maintain quiet. Morning walks, emails to crew members who'd worked with me, time with my mother. The old partner's voice trickled back into public consciousness when a gossip piece dug up past relationships and turned them into narrative fodder. They wrote about our breakup like a chapter in someone else's novel. The paper painted her as a skeptic and me as a surprise. She called me that night, voice thin. I could hear a new tremor of something, admiration roped with shame. She said, "I saw you on TV." I asked quietly, "What do you want?" She hesitated. "I didn't mean," she started, "but old words have weight." I told her I didn't want apologies staged to make me feel better. I wanted a life where I wasn't defined by her verdict. Our conversation ended with surprising civility. For me, the real work now was not revenge but stewardship, using this platform to make things I believed in, to mentor, to lend attention to stories that mattered. Still, human instincts flickered. I'll admit small thrills when I saw her name in a comment thread beside mine. But I kept my eyes forward because the future, unlike headlines, demands steady tending. I started a small mentorship program for young writers and actors, people who forgot their own value in the din. It felt like the right thing to do, and it calmed me in ways applause couldn't. I met a girl, Hannah, who reminded me of my younger self, stubborn, hungry, jittering with doubt. I saw that fire I had once muffled, helping her rewrite scenes, talking through auditions, watching her get cast in a play. This felt like real repayment. The program gave me purpose beyond awards. Meanwhile, a director offered me a chance to produce a small indie film about people who rebuild their lives from error. I signed on. Producing forced me into new muscles, fundraising, pitching, protecting a fragile script. It was grueling, terrifying, and honest work. Through this, my life became about multiplying opportunities, not hoarding them. The tabloids still found cheap hooks, but I focused on long games, building communities, supporting the next generation. One evening, at a reading, I found myself on a tiny stage watching Hannah deliver a line that landed like a hammer. The audience sucked in breath. In that catch I felt a whole tide of meaning, how my victory could be oxygen for others. I kept remembering that vow, not to punish, but to prove with work, with kindness, with steady presence. Success continued to arrive in uneven waves. I took roles that challenged me, each one a new risk. Some flopped, some soared. I lost a film to creative differences and felt crushed, but the next script I chose felt truer. Producing taught me to accept failure as fertilizer. I met people who pushed me in ways that felt fair and fierce. Public life brought new pitfalls, critics who parsed my choices like anatomy, but I found solidity in work and in small rituals. One night, a magazine reached me wanting a feature about my early life. I agreed, but when the writer dug for drama, they romanticized my hardship in ways that felt false. I asked them to include the parts about mentorship and the messy backstage of creativity, not just the cheap tragedy. The final piece was kinder. Personal moments accumulated, dinner with old friends, a quiet trip with my mother, Hannah's first big break. Through it all, I occasionally saw her, my ex, in a red carpet photo or on a list of attendees at events. Once at a charity auction, I found myself 3 tables away from her and we exchanged polite nods. The moment was surreal. I felt neither glee nor pain, just the outcome of someone who had walked far to get to a quiet center. Life had become a mesh of small joys and new challenges, all bearing the patina of work. Awards buzz returned the next season. The film I produced got attention, not for me but for the story. At an industry brunch, I overheard people praising the emotional honesty of our work. I felt proud in a practical way, pleased that effort had a ripple. Then, oddly, a scandal from someone else's life hit the news, and the industry trembled. People talked about accountability and power. I found myself reflecting on how success should come with responsibility. I started using my platform to advocate for better working conditions on sets, fair wages, safe environments, respect for crews who don't get credit. It felt right to push back on the glamour that often eclipsed the labor behind art. My efforts met resistance. A few people mocked that I'd become a crusader. But more often, I heard stories of people who'd been rescued from poor conditions by small policy changes. These wins weren't flashy. They were steady. In private, my ex watched from afar. Her comments, sometimes embarrassing, sometimes small and human. One day she sent a message. I saw the set raffle. It's good. It reads like a bridge. I replied briefly. Thanks. The exchange felt like a tiny, clean closure. The stakes had shifted. What mattered was not to make her pay, but to ensure other people didn't pay for anyone's success. As the industry evolved, I tried to stay rooted. I worked on a film that required me to be nothing but raw and vulnerable. We shot in a small town, living among locals to absorb pace and texture. The film demanded real emotional stripping, and I returned home exhausted each day, carrying scenes like heavy stones. The locals taught me small truths: how routines build character, how community is made of mundane kindness. When the film was released, critics hailed it as a turning point for my career. I was honored, and I felt the weight of responsibility anew. My mother cried at the premiere, and I held her hand like someone clinging to a raft. But success didn't erase scars. On social media, a thread resurfaced where someone had written that exes should be grateful when their former partners succeed. The comment thread turned sharp, half congratulatory, half cruel. It felt like the world preferred tidy endings. I thought about how unresolved memories can twist into stories that aren't mine to tell. In quiet moments, I wrote letters to myself, small notes to remember why I'd chosen this path. One read, not revenge. Proof. That distinction became my compass. Then came an unexpected personal challenge. My mother fell ill. The diagnosis was sudden and blunt, and it rearranged my priorities overnight. Filming paused, my schedule fractured. I moved back to the city where she lived, caring for her between hospital visits and scripts. The industry felt distant, and for the first time in years I had hours to be small and scared. People, colleagues, friends, offered help that felt like rope. Hannah organized readings to raise funds. Crew members visited with food. The kindness of strangers who become friends showed me the best side of this life. My mother's strength humbled me. She taught me courage in subtle ways. During those nights, the old words of my ex flashed back, not to haunt but as a marker. Someone had tried to limit my horizon and failed. Caring for my mother reoriented my idea of triumph. It was not a headline but time spent holding a hand, telling stories at dawn, watching sun through a window. In quiet, I began to write a new piece about resilience that wasn't about me alone. It would become a script shaped by this season of fear and tenderness. We made a small film from that script, a labor of love with people who donated time because they believed in care. The process healed more than it strained. I watched actors bring to life scenes shaped by hospital corridors and sunlit kitchens. When the film premiered at a local benefit screening, the room vibrated with shared experience. People came forward afterward to tell me how the film felt like them. The night felt like a community. That season, my mother improved slowly. Her recovery was a crooked line, not miraculous but steady. I learned how resilience contains small, patient victories. Professionally, the film caught attention too, and again my name appeared in festival circuits and panels, this time linked to advocacy for healthcare and humane work on sets. I used my platform to highlight funding for artists with caregiving responsibilities. The landscape shifted. People started talking about practical support. I felt proud not for awards, but for nudging a system to be less brutal. I also received an unexpected invitation to speak at a university about balancing caregiving and creative work. The invitation felt like a full circle. Once I'd been a student borrowing books, now I had a microphone to remind others that life's work is never just triumph. Years into this work, my life had a texture that pleased me, a mix of art, advocacy, and small domestic rituals. I watched careers bend in strange ways. Some friends left the industry, some doubled down, and some found strange new forms of success. I kept producing, mentoring, and acting in roles that demanded honesty. Hannah, now a force in the theater, sent me gifts of gratitude. The moment I hadn't expected came quietly. I received a letter from her, my ex. Not a message, but a handwritten note slipped into a program at a charity event. It said simply, "I saw you. You were there when I needed to see you. It was neither pleading nor proud, just an acknowledgement. My breath caught. The note didn't change my past. It was a small, human thing, proof that people can revise themselves without ceremony. I wrote back a short card, not to invite contact, but to say, I hope you are well. That exchange felt like a tiny closing of a loop. Outside of personal scraps, the industry shifted too. More voices foreground, more support for people with real lives. I realized my vow had never been about spectacle. It had been about the steady insistence that I belonged. Then the conversation about legacy crept in. As I aged in the public eye, questions changed. What do you want to leave behind? I found myself thinking of systems and young people and my mother's quiet strength. I started a foundation that offered microgrants to artists balancing caregiving and creative practice. It was small at first, then grew into something meaningful. I spoke at panels, signed papers, and learned the bureaucratic side of change. The foundation funded productions, childcare for rehearsals, stipends for hospital visits. Watching those projects bloom felt like tending a garden. My public image softened into someone who had hair at different lengths and a steadier voice. People began to speak of me in interviews, not only as an actress, but as a force for better working conditions. Through it all, I kept acting, because the craft is my first truth, and I kept mentoring. Sometimes I thought about the abrupt cruelty of that one sentence. You'll never amount to anything. It no longer stung. It was an artifact, a reminder of how thin hope can be and how resilient life proves. Then came an unexpected twist, a memoir offer. A publisher reached out, saying my story could help others. I hesitated. The thought of turning private seasons into public pages felt invasive, but I also understood the power of story, how one candid account could unstick someone else. I agreed, but with one condition: honesty without vindictiveness. The book included the red carpet night, the long stretches of unpaid labor, the caregiving, and the foundation. It also explored the awkward humanity of my ex, her cruelty and her small, later kindness. When the memoir was released, readers wrote to me in numbers that surprised me. People said they felt seen, that the book gave them permission to leave small cruelties behind. The book tour was intimate and often emotional. At one event, someone from my old neighborhood stood up and said, "You made it real for us." I cried in private rooms and smiled in public ones. The narrative arc of my life felt less like a fairy tale and more like weather, unpredictable, sometimes harsh, often beautiful. Through it all, I saw that my vow, quiet and fierce, had been less about proving her wrong and more about proving to myself that I could build something honest. Awards and headlines faded into seasons of steady work. The foundation grew, and so did the network of artists it supported. I continued to face criticism, of course, and moments of doubt. Acting remains a craft of exposure. Once, an interviewer asked me if I'd ever wanted to publicly humiliate my ex. I answered simply, no. I wanted a better answer. The phrase landed. People liked that. The press sometimes preferred drama, but the truth I preferred was simpler. Do the work. Help others. Stay honest. Life continued to hand me small shocks. A production that lost funding, a script that didn't land, a friend who moved away. Each time we rebuilt. Slowly, with coffee and conversation and stubbornness. The stage was never a podium for revenge. It was a place to show what a life remade could look like. One evening, at a gala supporting arts education, I met a young woman who'd been in our program. She hugged me and whispered, "I thought I had to stop dreaming. You showed me otherwise." Her words were a currency I kept. Time gives perspective. I watched new generations change the industry in ways I'd only dreamt. I saw people refusing to accept cruelty as a rite of passage. My foundation funded a bunch of projects that explored care and work in honest ways. I sometimes received awards for advocacy rather than performance, which felt like an odd but welcome recognition. My personal life found a gentle rhythm. Coffee, scripts, calls with my mother, evening walks where I let my mind wander without chiding. Occasionally, I'd catch a headline about her. My ex, doing well in her own field. People like tidy endings, but life rarely grants them neatness. That's the point I often shared at talks. Closure is a practice, not a single act. Occasionally, she and I exchanged emails that were short and human, notes about mutual acquaintances, or a show one of us recommended. Those interactions felt like proof that people could change without parades or public confession. The years broadened. I continued to act in stories that mattered, produced films that stretched empathy, and checked in on the Foundation's first grantees. The world remained messy, but my corner felt steadier. Once, at a small screening, a woman in the front row stood and said her life had been saved by a program our foundation funded. The room hushed. I felt the odd weight of responsibility and gratitude. My mother's health stabilized and she found new pleasures. Gardening, daytime television she loved with a stubborn loyalty. I came to terms with the past not by erasing it, but by weaving it into a larger tapestry. The sentence that once gashed me became a lesson. Words have power, but so does patient work. I had not built a life to spite anyone. I built a life to be useful, to be true. When people asked about the red carpet, I smiled and said it felt like a long walk home. Now, when I look back from a quieter room with my mother's photos on the shelf and awards tucked in a modest cabinet, the story feels less like triumph and more like a slow carving. The injustice she spoke into my life was a spark. It didn't make me brittle but persistent. I learned to answer cruelty not with cruelty, but with craft, compassion, and care for others. Walking the red carpet at the Oscars was a vivid moment, a public hinge, but what sustained me were the small acts: rewriting, showing up, tending, teaching. I am Evelyn. I once sat on a couch and bled hope into a screenplay. I walked the carpet and accepted an award. I started a foundation and helped others breathe. And yes, once she watched me on that red floor, and something shifted in both of us. Not vengeance, not theater, a recalibration. If you asked me now whether I wanted to humiliate or to heal, I'd say I wanted to prove that people can be more than someone else's claim about them. That's the story I live. Thanks for reading. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story. And don't forget to like the video to help others find it.